The hot sun settles over the desert, painting the world in oranges, reds, and pinks. Heavy boots stomp against the dry, dusty ground. A dead man's body is being dragged. The man doing the dragging is well-built, thin but muscular. A tattered blue cloak is draped around his shoulders. His crisp blue eyes look bored, maybe a bit annoyed, as he looks at his companion. Sitting against a nearby building is a portly man. He's short, with blonde hair combed to the left. He's dressed fairly smartly in clean blue jean overalls with a bright red bandana around his neck. His white shirt is free of blood or dirt. The muscular man approaches a wooden cart filled with dead bodies. Some help carrying these bodies would have been nice, the thin man, Revolver, says. The short man, Corbett, takes a swig from a flask. Sorry, something about getting blood all over me. I try to avoid it when I can. Rev lifts the body and adds it to the cart. A hauler who doesn't want to get his hands dirty. I never could understand that. Corbett offers him the flask. If hauling corpses doesn't get to you anymore, Rev, then you've been in the business too long. Revolver takes the flask and drinks. He wipes at his mouth when he's done, and he chuckles. He passes the flask back. Tell me about it. The story then jumps to earlier. Earlier in the day, earlier in the week, who knows. We're at Mammy's Diner with Revolver when a cute waitress named Amy delivers the morning paper. She reports that his bone omelet will be ready soon, whatever that is. Revolver starts to leaf through the paper. Apparently, half the dang thing is the wanted ads these days, and he finally finds a good one. Dead only, $35,000 for the Steeds. That sounds familiar. He looks at Amy. Weren't they just at Cordelia's south of here? Amy says that they were, and they were horrible. Poor Sheriff Gale. Revolver asks her what happened, and she tells him. Now, she only came in at the very end. She heard the gunshot out in the street, and when she looked outside, Sheriff Gale was staring down the Iron Steeds' leader, Schindel. Gale was the best shot in town, and he unloaded his gun before Schindel even had a chance to return fire. But somehow, every shot missed. It was like Schindel could dodge the bullets. Once the sheriff was empty, well, that was it. Schindel is one scary guy. You aren't thinking on taking on all of the Steeds at once, are you, Revolver? Our leading man doesn't answer. At least, not verbally. Instead, he stands up and heads for the door. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 31.1 of Last Shot, First Draw. We've just gotten our first meeting with our leading man, Revolver, as well as a basic introduction to the world of Last Shot. First off, we very definitely have a tone established for this world. One in which death is present, it's possible, and it's also sadly familiar to our cast. Think about a comic that we've already covered, like Tailweaver recently, and how despite the fact that it was a war comic, we never saw a lead character die. In fact, the only named character death that I can think of was Lord Pontus, and that was right before the book ended. Lord Duma even complained about the tragic losses of war, but we never saw him actually do any killing. Here, Revolver just killed a score of men, and he isn't bothered by it in the least. Death is a much more regular part of life here in Last Shot. This is further demonstrated by Rev and Corbett working. Revolver killed these men, he is now moving their bodies, and Corbett will haul them to wherever it is that they go to get rid of them. Their job is death, but neither man seems terribly haunted by those implications. Corbett, perhaps, but only a little bit. He clearly doesn't want to touch the dead bodies, and he is shown drinking, so maybe it has taken more of a toll on him than he is trying to let on. But this scene also shows us how close that the two men are. They might be working, but Revolver is okay with doing a little bit of Corbett's share of the work. They tease each other comfortably a little bit. The atmosphere is very relaxed. For them, killing people and moving their bodies, it's just another day at the office. We also see an odd match of technology levels in Last Shot. The background that we see in this scene feels very antiquated, right? The buildings look like they're made of stone or maybe plaster with terracotta tiles or wood for their rooftops. But we can also clearly see a red eyepiece worn by one of the corpses strapped to his head by a leather piece. It doesn't really look like a monocle. It doesn't look like it's to help his vision. It looks more like a targeting array to me. One of the other corpses that we see has bright purple hair, implying either that there's hair dye in this world or the creators of this comic were very much inspired by anime and, some people just have purple hair. Plus, as this opening scene winds down, a piece of paper flutters past the camera, and on it is a complicated technical schematic. The world of Last Shot is one of high tech and low down. The scene with Amy confirms that Revolver is a bounty hunter. He did indeed kill those dudes in our opening scene. But he's also still a human being. He orders food from a greasy spoon. He gets along with Amy comfortably. They gossip and they share information. They feel comfortable and relaxed. And Amy is familiar enough with Revolver that she knows that he is going to go face those iron steeds alone. This human connection, plus the one that we saw with Corbett in the earlier scene, tells us that Revolver might be a killer, sure, but he isn't yet a monster. The newspaper also tells us that this world needs bounty hunters like Revolver. Half of the wanted ads in the paper are for bounty hunters, and the first example that the writers are giving us of the kind of work that bounty hunters do, this guy Schindel, just killed a sheriff who is generally, stereotypically speaking, a good guy type of character. So Revolver is now morally justified in hunting Schindel down, and we are given a moral pass for participating as an audience. We also learn that Schindel has some kind of trick up his sleeve that allows him to dodge bullets, and Revolver is going to have to outwit that trick, whatever it is. That's pretty clever writing for just our opening pages. So who did the writing for Last Shot? Last Shot is the brainchild of a company called Studio XD, which is a collective of several artists and writers who were working together in the late 90s and early 2000s. That means that there are actually a lot of people who made this comic happen, and many of them are names that I've followed since, and many of them are names that I don't know any of their work after. Kicking things off, Last Shot First Draw was written by Ken Sui-Chong and Josh Gainsborough, who worked under the pseudonym Locke, with the O in his name actually being a zero. Out of the two authors, Sui-Chong is the one who remained a part of the comic book scene moving forward, going on to write a handful of comics for Marvel in the 2000s. I personally know him best as one of the main writers for Udon's line of Street Fighter comics that have been published on and off over the years since the 2000s. It's literally my favorite video game adaptation to a comic book that I've ever read here in the States. I've always found that Sui-Chong's work tends to lean really heavily on action sequences and a sense of fun, more so than any character drama or emotional weight that the story may have. Although those things are definitely present, it's just he likes to focus more on action sequences and a good time. And clearly, I like his stuff because I bought all of those Street Fighter comics that have been published since I first read Last Shot. I've been a staple on that comic. Gainsborough, who moving forward I'll refer to as his pen name, Locke, did not stay in the world of comic books. Instead, alongside some of the artists that we're going to be talking about in just a second, he helped found the digital community Gaia Online, originally known as Gaia Interactive. I actually remember finding Gaia Online when I got internet access in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I ran around on it for a little bit, but it never quite clicked with me for whatever reason. I knew that it got really popular for a minute there, and I believe it's still active today. But yeah, Gaia was not something that I stuck around with, but it's really cool to me to know that the people who created this comic, maybe this comic they didn't find a lot of success on, but they did find success somewhere else in their lives. That's just nice to know. On the artistic side, Last Shot First Draw is penciled and inked by Long Vo, who sometimes went by the pseudonym VO or Voltstagic. Vo's style is clearly anime-inspired, with the classic staples of spiky hair, large eyes, and a general lack of any kind of heavy shading. His work is super solid, and after the cancellation of Last Shot, Vo would go on to do the artwork for Marvel's X-Men Evolution comic book, the early 2000s Robotech series, a Thundercats miniseries, as well as some of those very Street Fighter comics that I mentioned earlier. Vo has since gone on to become a video game artist, actually doing design work for Capcom, the company that owns and releases Street Fighter games, on titles such as Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, Street Fighter 4, Super Street Fighter 4, Final Fight Double Impact, Ultra Street Fighter 2 The Final Challengers, and even Street Fighter 5 Arcade Edition. This is a guy who draws Street Fighter so good that Capcom hired him to do it for them. Anyways, we also have colors by Kid Kum Visarut-Vanit, better known as Saka. I cannot find almost any personal information at all on Saka other than that they worked as a colorist and that their credits list pretty much matches Long Vo's. We've got books like Thundercats, Robotech, X-Men Evolution. Saka's digital coloring here looks great, with bright, vibrant colors that make the comic page feel more like an animation still, actually. You look at someone's artwork like Joe Mad on Uncanny X-Men or Battle Chasers, and you can see the anime inspiration in his creative DNA. But Saka's coloring techniques help make Long Vo's pencils look like an anime. Like, it looks like you just freeze-framed something. Saka was one of the founding artists behind Gaia Online, working under the screen name Sakuna Hito. And finally, we have Charles Park, often known simply as CP. Park most often worked as an inker and a colorist, but his real superpower, as stated by his coworkers, was the computer. Park's work was generally confined to environmental work, like creating the backgrounds for scenes or creating background effects and FX artwork like explosions, speed effects, lighting, that kind of thing. Whenever possible, though, Park would work 3D models into his comics, which was still a relatively new thing in comic books at the time, and it was even harder to make it look good like it was supposed to fit. Park also did work for Marvel, although his website lists several other notable clients, like the WB, back before they became known as the CW, Disney, Namco, Capcom, again, very nice, Nickelodeon, MTV, Funimation, Gaia Interactive, which then became Gaia Online, and for comic and manga fans, we've got work at Tokyopop, Imagecomics, Marvel, sure, and Harris Publishing. That's a hell of a client list. That's a lot of projects. So to summarize, the overall story of Last Shot was conceived of by all of Studio XD. All of the creators had some hand in shaping the overall story. Ken Sui-Chong is specifically listed as having written the script for this inaugural one-shot, but it was overall co-written by him and Locke. Long Vo did the pencils and inks, Saka did the coloring, and Park did the special effects and environmental work. There's actually quite a bit of supplemental at the end of this comic that we'll be taking a look at that demonstrates how fluidly the art team worked together in order to create Last Shot. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've got a comic to finish first. Having found his next target, Revolver wakes a snoozing Corbett and offers him the job of hauling bodies from Cordelia's. Corbett takes it, obviously, and the pair head off. 2 hours later, we're at a saloon called Cordelia's house, where a relaxed Schindel sits at a table, relaying the story of how he killed Sheriff Gale. Schindel is a tall, thin man, wearing a big black leather jacket. He also has on a cowboy hat with a red monocle strapped over his right eye. A thin mustache graces his upper lip, and his wide smile shows a neat row of pretty teeth.
"He took it like a man and just stood there,"
Schindel says.
"You gotta wonder, where does a man find the strength to go on after he's already lost? Though, he wasn't so tough after I shot his knees off."
Schindel holds up the sheriff's badge.
"I was gonna do his elbow next, but he was starting to pass out, so..."
4 of the Iron Steeds turn around from the nearby counter and finish his sentence for him. "Oh well, what can you do?" It's clear that they're used to this line in Schindel's storytelling. Long Vo sells us on the routine of it by drawing the men in a chibi style with very bored-looking faces. They're used to this. For those unfamiliar, chibi refers to an anime or manga style in which a character is scrunched down into a little tiny body with a very big cartoony head. Here, in this scene, it not only helps to sell how monotonous this line must be from Schindel, but it also allows Vo to fit all 4 of the men into a single panel. If he drew them all at regular proportions, he might not have had the room for them, so it's a nice space-saving technique and comedic delivery. Anyways, the 4 say their line, and Schindel notices something. He is suddenly a blur as he shoots forward in his seat, dodging the bullet that would have taken him in the head. From the front door of the building, Revolver swears, "I'll be damned." Schindel draws his own pistol.
Not bad. Let's see if you can dodge bullets too.
The Iron Steeds draw their guns and open fire. Revolver holds his forearms up in a cross shape. Armored gauntlets protect his upper mass and face as he runs to the side and jumps behind an outcropping in the building. As he sails into its protection, he stares at his target. One shot disarms the purple-haired guy, a second hits him in his chest armor, and a third goes right through his head. Schindel isn't impressed by Revolver's trick shooting.
Idiots.
As he leaps behind the bar, another one of his men goes down, taking 2 in the chest. Carefully, Schindel peeks over the counter and then disappears as Revolver almost shoots him again. 2 of the Iron Steeds lay down, suppressing fire, cursing their boss for killing the sheriff. "I knew it'd be trouble," one of them says. "Yeah, it really jacked up the bounty," the other replies. 35 friggin' thousand! That's just too much money!" They duck down to reload quickly, but when they pop back up to resume fire, one of the tables is sailing towards them. It knocks them both back and pins them onto the floor. Revolver jumps on top of it and shoots them both. He then looks at Schindel. Schindel looks at him. And then he takes off. Revolver fires, hitting the counter, and Schindel dives out the front window. Glass scatters everywhere. A gun in each hand, Revolver follows him outside, and the 2 men meet in the street out front.
It took you 12 bullets to kill all of my men,
Schindel says, his hat now gone.
Why don't you reload?
Revolver takes him up on that. With practiced ease, he dumps the empty shells, reloads the guns, cocks them both, and then fires 3 bullets. Schindel sidesteps them all. 1, 2, 3.
Hell of a trick, eh?
Schindel smiles.
It only took me 25 years to master the art of bullet dodging. Now we both have 3 shots left. So let's have some fun. For each shot that you take, I'll take 1.
Revolver fires first.
4.
Schindel's return shot grazes Revolver's gun belt, cutting it off of him and leaving him with just the 1 gun he has in hand.
A little slow on the moves, eh?
Revolver fires again.
5.
Schindel's next shot grazes Revolver's left cheek, just enough to draw blood, but he looks unfazed.
You're down to your last shot,
Schindel says. Roll credits!
You've lost. But perhaps you can tell me how a persistent man such as yourself finds the durability to go on, to face certain death.
Revolver calmly wipes the blood off of his cheek. And then he smiles. Schindel doesn't seem to like that.
Oh, sure, take your time. My next shot is going to go right between your eyes.
Revolver takes aim and fires. Schindel tracks the bullet. In his head, we can hear him think,
It's too far to the right. This is an easy dodge.
Then Schindel moves.
It's sad, really, how people can't acknowledge their own mortality until it's staring them in the...
A bullet embeds into the wooden frame of the building next to Schindel, and a second bullet hits Schindel right in the chest, and it passes clear through.
Impossible, Schindel
sinks.
He had a gun built into his hand? He fired 2 shots at the exact same time, camouflaging the noise from the hidden gun.
In Schindel's red eyepiece, we see a close-up shot of Revolver's hands. Up to this point in the comic, Revolver's hands have been wrapped in cloth or in bandages. By now, we can see that those wraps hid a small gun that is built into the back of Revolver's hand. Schindel coughs up blood.
That was a good trick, boy.
And then he drops to the ground, dead. Revolver retrieves the sheriff's badge from Schindel's coat. Then he spins the chamber of his handgun, ejecting the spent shell. He closes it and spins it, and we then transition to Revolver and Corbett transporting the bodies. As he sits next to the big man, Revolver absent-mindedly clicks the chamber back and forth under his thumb. Corbett eyes this warily. "Rev, I hate when you do that. It makes me nervous." Revolver assures him that the chamber's empty. "One of these days it won't be, though, and you'll blow your brains out," Corbett warns. "You gotta live long enough to spend the reward from this haul," he says, referencing the 6 dead bodies in their cart. "All of my money goes straight to Aiden," Revolver replies. "What, you're still paying those hands off?" Corbett asks. Revolver nods. "Yeah, probably will be until the day I meet on this cart, too." Well, Aiden's a shrewd businessman, Corbett says. "He gave you those replacements, gave you back a life, but now you gotta spend that whole life working to pay him back." Revolver doesn't really seem bothered by it. "It's a living," he replies. This is a pretty straightforward comic. And I'm actually kind of surprised at how straightforward this is. Like, the comic opens, and the bad guys that we're going to spend the issue pursuing are actually already dead. If you're paying attention to the opening scene with Revolver and Corbett moving dead bodies at all, then you easily recognize the purple-haired man and Schindel from the Iron Steeds. It's not like there's a lot of comic between seeing Schindel's dead body at the beginning of the issue and then Revolver confronting him, so it's not like we should have forgotten in the intervening time, right? And that kind of eliminates any stakes that this story had. To be fair to the authors, I suppose that this is a work of heroic fiction. Did anyone go into this comic expecting that the lead character would fail in his mission or somehow die in the first issue? No, that would be silly. Or at least it would be really unexpected, and it would be really weird, tonally speaking. I can only think of one other comic I've read that had a fake-out leading character, and that would be DC's New 52 take on the Wildstorm character Voodoo. And I'm still grouchy about how that story switched lead characters, because once you invest in a character, you want to see that character succeed, right? Killing them or swapping them out for another character ruins that investment. And it sets a precedent that we shouldn't be attaching to any character, because then they could change at any moment. So what am I even talking about? The lack of stakes in this comic, right? It honestly doesn't bother me reading it. And I'm kind of surprised to be saying that, because it really should bother me. In almost any other comic, it would bother me. Just from a storytelling perspective, a story that doesn't have any stakes to it basically isn't a story at all. It's just a thing that happened, right? But I think that the reason that it doesn't bother me is that this is pretty much a setup issue. Last Shot First Draw is an oversized one-shot that acts as a setup for the Last Shot ongoing series. In fact, First Draw was originally released in May of 2001, while the ongoing series didn't launch until August of that year, a full 3 months later. So readers could go to the comic store, stumble across Last Shot First Draw, buy it, read it, and that would give them plenty of time to pre-order the first issue of the comic. That's pretty smart from an advertising and production standpoint, but it also means that anything happens here in this story can only be set up for what's actually going to happen in the main ongoing series, because that's the thing you're going to be expected to buy moving forward. So we meet Revolver and Corbett. We get to see how Revolver operates, that he's a bounty hunter, that he hunts criminals with little remorse and less mercy, that he's got a debt to pay back. We're meant to read this issue, get interested in the overall themes and stories, honestly to get interested in Revolver, and then buy the next issue. So if Last Shot issue 1 doesn't have some goddamn stakes to it, I'm going to be righteously upset. We need to know what we're getting into moving forward. Anyways, the action sequences here are pretty cool, and it's really easy to follow. The small moment that we get with Schindel and his gang helps to cement our dislike of him. He just acts like a jackass, right? The way that he's reveling in the story of how he killed Sheriff Gale, it just shows that this is a character who enjoys killing. And his men are clearly annoyed by the storytelling, which makes us dislike Schindel even more. This is enhanced later on when his gang even complains about his murder of the sheriff, increasing the bounty on all of them. That murder has now brought too much attention to them, deadly attention, and now his men have to pay for his arrogance. That's really good writing. The downside, though, of even making the rest of the Iron Steeds dislike Schindel is that I like his men more, and then all of them get shot and they're killed. So I'm never going to see these characters again, despite the fact that I'm like, oh, I kind of like those guys. Like in like a sad puppy kind of way. They were criminals, but still, they weren't as bad as Schindel. That guy I hated. And so I'm just kind of left with this sad feeling that, oh, they're all dead. Oh, no. I do like Revolver wearing bulletproof armor, and I like that one of the members of the gang wears the same type of armor as well. It isn't just something special that Revolver can do. Anybody can do it, which is something I really like. Think about the fact that Revolver has handguns, but nobody else that we've seen so far does. If having a handgun is something that is this tricky and this useful and effective, you'd think that more people would have those type of weapons, right? No, because if they did have that type of weapon, Revolver wouldn't be nearly as special and he wouldn't be nearly as cool. He wouldn't be our lead character anymore. But that rule doesn't apply to him wearing armor. Anybody can do it, and it helps make Revolver's guns stand out more as part of his overall arsenal. He is armored, yes, and he is armed. Other characters can be armored, yes, and they can be armed in different ways. That's just a cool bit of mixing things up. You also don't see a lot of armor in most Western-style comics. Like, this comic is very clearly influenced by Western cinema. We're set in a desert. We're doing gunshots at high noon. A criminal just shot a sheriff. You don't typically see people wearing bulletproof armor in even fantasy Westerns. We did a whole streak of Marvel's Western comics not too long ago here on the show, and none of those books had characters wearing bulletproof armor at all, even the ones set in contemporary times. So it's kind of interesting to see it here, and it helps make the book feel a little bit more like it's leaning towards that fantasy side of storytelling, as opposed to it's a serious, real-world, gritty Western kind of thing. I am a bit confused as to why Revolver is only wearing armor on his forearms, and he's got a piece sitting at his neck, like around his clavicle, but the man wears absolutely no shirt at all. And I mean, he's in good shape, so it works for him. Like, if I looked like Revolver, I probably wouldn't have a shirt on either. But it still seems like a really good way for him to get shot in the chest or in the legs. He could get shot in the legs. You know, if you've ever watched one of the Marvel movies and seen Captain America holding his shield over his center mass, that's good use of a protective shield, but nobody ever shoots him in the legs. And to be fair, the legs are a harder target to shoot, but clearly, as we've just seen, Lastshot's the kind of world that has dudes who can shoot from a great distance, men who are so fast they can dodge bullets. It's ridiculous and over the top, and eventually, somebody's going to shoot those tootsies, man. Speaking of Schindel's big secret, the fact that his secret is that he just dodges bullets isn't really clever at all. Given the level of technology that we have seen in this world, I was expecting that, like, his monocle tracked the trajectory of bullets, or it predicted the future using an AI or something. But no, he's just fast. This is the same kind of skill that, honestly, you would find in one of Marvel's old Western comics from, like, the 40s and 50s. And it just feels plain. Not lazy, because I do think, from a story perspective, it is presented well. The authors and the art team do make a show of Schindel doing it. But it doesn't feel very smart or unique or honestly interesting at all, especially when Schindel dodges and then we get Revolver's hidden technique, his handguns. It just makes Schindel seem even less impressive in comparison, and I'm not gonna lie, Revolver having handguns is like the thing that sold me on Lastshot when I first saw it when I was a teen. Revolver having cyborg gun hands was so cool, and I mean, it is still super cool to me, even now in my 40s. For those listening on the podcast version, Revolver has a cylinder of a 6-shooter embedded into the back meat of his hand. A small barrel then emerges from that and sits on top of his knuckles. The 3 fingers underneath that barrel are covered in metal armor or replaced totally. It's very hard to tell. And yes, he's got one of these guns on each of his hands. He is literally armed in his arms all the time. But in Lastshot First Draw, he covers them in gloves or wraps. You don't notice that these things are there. You don't think that they exist at all. You just see the pistols at his hips, and boom, suddenly you're a dead man. This is such a simple but cool idea that even now, 23 years later, oh, it's 2024, I still like this idea. I still think it's cool, and that's just kind of wild to me, man. Anyways, as the scene wraps up with him and Corbett returning to Patton Town, we do learn a little bit more about Revolver. Whatever happened to his hands, they seem to have been fixed against his will. Corbett says that Aiden fixed his hands and now has him paying off the debt. And as far as we can see, that is all that Revolver does with his life. He doesn't have a family, or hobbies, or a home. All of his money goes to Aiden, forcing him to be a bounty hunter. This is complemented by the fact that Revolver seems kind of disinterested in the work. Like, he's got this I'm a cold, tough guy thing going on all of the time. And Revolver acts like that because he doesn't really have a choice in the matter. He needs as much money as possible, as fast as possible. And for him, that means bounty hunting. He isn't passionate about making the world a better place. He doesn't enjoy hunting other people. He doesn't enjoy winning fights like Schindel seemed to. He doesn't hide a hunger for murder behind a wanted ad, right? Like the Punisher did in the Punisher Western one-shot. This is a guy who's just doing his job. So who is this mysterious Aiden that Revolver owes all this money to? Well, when we return to the story, Revolver places a wad of cash down on a wooden counter, but he keeps his hand on it. Given or taken, yours it will stay. No man nor death can take it away. What am I? Revolver asks. Across the table, an old man scoffs. The answer is obviously a name. You seem to be losing your edge, my friend. Revolver takes his weight off the stack of bills, allowing the old man to collect it. This is Aiden, and he starts to count the stack. We can't make out much of the physicality of the old man. He sits behind a counter. His body is wrapped in a brown cloak or some kind of sack with a hood, obscuring much of his form. A later on panel will show that he is either really hunched over or he's got something large on his back, but underneath the cloth. Like, you can just see there's like this mass behind him. Aiden wears circular glasses and has a white beard. He almost feels like something that is pretending to be human to me, but I mean, he does look human. And we haven't seen anything that's not human in Last Shot yet, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here. That should put him at about $2 million left out of the $3.5 million that he owed, Revolver figures. It's only taken him 10 years to get there. That reminds me, Aiden says. I've got a potential job for you, Rev. The government has yet to release this information, but my sources got it to me early. Aiden produces a paper. On it is an image of a little girl. She has dark eyes and white hair. A large scar slashes across her chest, peeking out from underneath a worn white shirt. Find this girl. Bring her to Nolam City alive. It could put quite the dent in your debt, he says. But Revolver is suspicious. Why are you doing me this favor? It isn't a favor. It's good business, Aiden says. If someone else does the job, then I don't see a penny of it, now do I? Be that as it may, Revolver isn't interested. Taking people alive is complicated, and he stops in mid-sentence when he says Aiden say the bounty amount of $6 million. Well, in any case, I gotta stock up on ammo, Revolver says. 100 bullets should do it. Aiden drops a sack of bullets on the counter. Tell you what, they're on the house this time. Just take this with you, and here he pushes the image of the girl toward Rev, and come back with that bounty. Revolver loads his handgun and snaps it shut. He'll think about it. He leaves, and we get a big panel of Aiden just staring at the door. Well, that's creepy. Outside, Revolver flips through the want ads again. 10,000, 25, 5,000. He sighs and looks up into the sky. 6 million. Well, I think somebody's got a job. The final scene with Aiden has two things that I want to point out. The first is that I love Revolver testing Aiden with a riddle. We don't have a reason for this yet, but what I appreciate about it is how it establishes a history between these two. The authors don't introduce their relationship or explain anything between them. They don't tell us that, Revolver's debt is canceled if he can stump Aiden or anything like that. It just feels like Revolver trying to outthink this old man, who holds some amount of power over him thanks to his debt. Revolver does owe him $2 million more after all. This demonstrates a quiet, established history between the two men. And even if we don't know the depth of their relationship yet, it feels like the authors do. And that's important for a new comic in a new world that's never been seen before. It makes it have a sense of history and depth that make it feel more real. We see echoes of this idea in Revolver scenes with Amy and Corbett, but it really stood out to me here with this scene. Secondly, I love the hard-cut gag of Aiden telling Revolver that the job pays $6 million, and then they just cut to Rev casually asking for 100 more bullets. That's great. It would seem to indicate that despite his seeming lack of interest in the job, that Revolver does have an interest in the job, and I just got a good chuckle out of it. But when Aiden asks if Revolver is going to take the job, Rev tries to play it really cool. I'll think about it. I'm not 100% sold on it yet. Which does kind of undercut the previous scene's humor. So I got a bit of storytelling whiplash here, but it's not anything that's super terrible. Revolver has now been put into place for where the story's going to open in our ongoing series. Obviously, he's going to end up taking that job escorting the little girl, whether he wants to or not. Otherwise, we wouldn't have brought it up. It's the best solution to what we know to be his current problem, that he needs to pay off Aiden. And that $6 million will do the job with money left over. He could pay interest and still have money if he wanted to. The only real trick at this point is that he's going to have to turn the girl over to somebody at some point, and I find it hard to believe that Revolver would do that. Classically, in this type of story, the leading man, tough guy type of character comes to care about the girl like a surrogate father, and then he turns on the people who've hired him. Spoiler alert if you've ever seen The Last of Us or similar projects. But I guess we're going to have to wait and see if that's what happens next week. One of the other things that I really, really like about First Draw is that there are a ton of supplemental materials that are published after the comic story wrapped up. First among the bonus material is a small chibi-style joke page. That page where the Iron Steeds opened fire on Revolver and he blocked their shots with the armor on his arms. Well, in this outtake, he actually gets shot in the head, the joke being that his head is too big thanks to being a chibi character. It's super cute, and I really appreciate this kind of thing in my comics. It's fun for the authors to acknowledge that all it would take is one misplaced shot, and their lead character's suddenly dead. So I really got a kick out of this. We also got promo images of Last Shot issue 1's front and back covers. That way, in 3 months when the book comes out, you know what you're looking for. We get a small profile on Revolver, which is really neat and cute. And we learn that he's got allergies, which is something you don't really expect in your lead characters in a heroic fantasy comic. We also get introductions to the book by both author Locke and artist Long Vo, including how the title came about. As someone with an interest in comic book history, I super appreciate this kind of thing in your first issue. And then, yes, we've still got more, we've got 2 pages of character sketches and notes about the cast of the book. Some of them are of Revolver, we've got Corbett's evolution, we've got Schindel in his gang, and we've got some mysterious artwork regarding the $6 million girl. And that's a great bonus. Finally, for our last bit of bonus material, we get some unused cover concepts and artwork from the various members of the studio and the ways that they tried to pitch in to help this one get developed. All of which are things that I love about this issue. Comic books are one of the coolest forms of entertainment to me, largely because anybody could make a comic book. Anybody can learn to write or draw or color or whatever for almost nothing. And getting to see someone else's creative journey and process along that road is so interesting. And especially at this time in my own personal history, this is when I was really hungry to learn how comic books are made and see how other people are doing it. What can I pull into my attempts and my journey? So this was really fantastic for me. Especially since Studio XD was made up of so many different artists with so many different skills, it's just fun to see their individual styles on display. This kind of material makes the one-shot feel incredibly special. It isn't just teasing us for the actual upcoming comic, it feels more like we've been invited to be a part of the world, right? We get to peek behind the curtain and see how the comic got made, and not a lot of comic books are willing to do that, especially these days. And admittedly, here in the year 2024, you can find all kinds of tutorials and guides and classes about making comics on the internet. There are a ton of artists who are sharing their methods with people, so it's not like this would be incredibly useful these days. But it is considerate on the part of the creative team, so I really like this. Plus, this comic was $3 with 32 pages of material. That's a hell of a deal in terms of a bang for your buck. Even back in 2001, Marvel books were 32 pages with 10 pages of ads, so 22 pages of story for $3. So big ups to Studio XD and Image Comics for bringing in the big boy amount of pages here. Like, this is a comic that is selling you on a comic, not selling you on ads. Overall, Last Shot First Draw was a fun, fast-paced read with action, humor, and just enough mysterious background teasing to keep me interested in learning more about the book. Revolver's handguns are an idea that I still just absolutely adore. Mwah. The comic looks great, and admittedly, so long as you're an anime fan, it looks great, and if anime's not your thing, it's probably not going to be to your liking. But for me, it was right up my alley then, and it's right up my alley now. I still really like the way Last Shot looks, and there's just so much bonus material here. Like, this is my first time rereading Last Shot in probably 20 years, and right now, based off this one issue, we're just off to a great start. Next time, Revolver is on the job, but he has to go through Kraid, the man with a cannon on his arm, to do it. How can two handguns stand up to an arm cannon? Well, join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 31.2 of Last Shot to find out, in an episode called Food Chain. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.